All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Let me start by thanking you all for taking a little time out of your day today to learn more about local park grant opportunities here at Texas Parks and Wildlife. My name is Dan Reese, and I'm the Local Park Grant Program Manager. And I'll be joined by several other folks this afternoon throughout the webinar. And we'll just walk you through the ins and outs of the local park program. Before we get started, I would like to encourage everyone to ask as many questions as you can think of throughout today's presentation. Typically, this is a presentation that we would be having in person at our office here in Austin, so we would like to try to kind of keep that interactive component despite the webinar format. Sure, most of you have had an opportunity to attend some sort of webinar over the last year and a half or so. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the GoToMeeting format, you'll see a control panel over on the right-hand side of your screen. Within that control panel, there's a tab called Questions, and that's where we'd like you to type your questions in. So at any point in time, if we're discussing something and you'd like a little further clarification or just have a general question, please feel free to type your questions in there, and we'll do our best to address those as we make our way through the presentation. If you do have a question that's maybe more project specific, or you'd prefer to not discuss it or have us address it during the webinar, you'll see our contact information periodically throughout this afternoon's webinar. So please always feel free to reach out to us for individual questions, and we'd always be happy to discuss your project with you. So at the end of today's presentation, we will be compiling all the questions asked, as well as our responses to those questions, and we'll make those all available to you. Additionally, we'll record today's webinar and make that available in addition to a PDF of today's PowerPoint. So either way, we've got you covered. Before we get too far into this presentation, we would like to just ask a few questions just to kind of get a feel for who all we have in attendance this afternoon. So you're probably seeing a poll pop up within your control panel if I'm really doing this properly. First question we're asking is, have you previously submitted a local park grant application? And thank you everyone for participating. Looks like we're getting some pretty good feedback here. And this will just kind of help us make our way through the presentation knowing who all we have in the audience. So it looks like about a 50-50 split there, so that's good. And since I was able to do that without disconnecting the webinar, I guess I'll roll out one more, or maybe two more poll questions. The next one I have for you here is, have you previously been awarded or administered a local park grant through Texas Parks and Wildlife? All right, thank you very much. Looks like we're getting good participation, so thank you all for that. Looks like we're at about 60% no, 40% yes. And I have one more poll question for you. And you'll learn a little bit more about the different programs within local parks. But we're curious here about maybe the size of the local unit of government or the type of grant that you're most interested in. For small communities, we would define that as a population under 20,000. A non-urban would be any community with a population less than 500,000. And then the urban folks are 500,000 or more. And we'll cover each one of these programs in a little more detail later in this afternoon's presentation. All right, well, thank you very much. Looks like we're getting some good feedback from everyone, so I appreciate that. So I believe that's all the polls we'll have for you today. Again, thank you for your participation. And again, I encourage you all to ask questions throughout this afternoon's presentation. And again, we'll be making all these materials available within the resources section in our online grant management system, which we call Rec Grants Online, or Argo 2020. And if you're not familiar with Argo 2020, you'll learn quite a bit more about that system throughout the afternoon. So here's what we have planned for you this afternoon. Once I'm done with the introductory portion of the presentation, I'll slide over and let Aaron take over, and he'll guide you through some of the more important details of the Local Park Grant Program. Aaron will be discussing funding sources, program eligibility and requirements, award ceilings, timelines, this year's important deadlines, among a host of other things. Once Aaron's completed his portion of the presentation, Blake Powers, our Business Systems Administrator, will jump on and he'll walk through the ins and outs of Rec Grants Online, or Argo 2020. Those of you who have previously applied for a local park grant or maybe administered one over the last couple of years are probably fairly familiar with Argo 2020. Those of you who aren't will feel like experts by the end of this afternoon's presentation. No pressure, Blake. And afterwards, when Blake's completed his part, we'll probably take a 5 or 10 minute break. And then Matt and Susan will both jump on and they'll walk through our scoring criteria, which we use when evaluating local park applications. So quickly, here's who we are. Daniel Lagarde is the Director of Recreation Grants here at Texas Parks and Wildlife. And you'll be learning primarily about local park grants this afternoon, but we do have other grant opportunities available. We have grants for rec trails, for boating access facilities and target range facilities. We also have a programming grant. So if you're interested in those opportunities, you can find more information on our website, or you're welcome to contact any one of those of us participating today, and we'd be happy to help point you in the right direction. That's me on the bottom left there. Again, my name is Dan Reese, and I'm the grant manager of the local park program here. And I've already made mention of Blake a few times. Blake, again, is our business systems and communications administrator, and he will be your go-to for all things related to applying for and administering grants through Argo 2020. And then my last slide here, get the pleasure of introducing you all to the dream team here. These are the local park grant coordinators. These folks continually impress me with their ability to go above and beyond on a daily basis. And personally, for me, it's a real pleasure to get to work with each one of these team members. And I'm sure you'll all feel the same way once you get started on your applications and work your way through your grants. Aaron, Susan, and Matt have all been with the program for a number of years now. Aaron generally administers grants in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and then pretty much everything north and east of there, so the East Texas. Susan frequently administers our active grants anywhere from Austin down to San Antonio, and then all the way down through the lower Rio Grande Valley. And Matt frequently can be found administering grants in and around Austin, all the way down through the Houston area and out, further east from there. And we do our best to somewhat break up active grants in terms of who administers them internally, geographically based on those regions. But with that said, if you're an East Texas community or you're from San Antonio area, don't feel like you have to direct all your questions to just the individuals, the coordinator for your area. We're we're always all available for questions. And we do travel quite a bit. So if you're ever in a pinch and you're trying to reach Matt, for example, and can't get a hold of him, feel free to work your way down through the list and contact any one of us. And then you'll also notice that we are currently down a team member. Our compliance coordinator position is currently vacant, and we're working as hard as we can to get that filled by the end of the summer. And we're hoping to have a person there relatively soon. So I don't see any additional questions at this point in time, so that really concludes my part. I'm going to slide over and let Aaron Fryer take over.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks everybody for attending. Looks like we have a good group today. Like we saw, about half and half. Some of you are familiar with our program. Some of you might be first timers. So this is going to be a good chance to learn the overview of just who we are, what we do, and all the ins and outs that you'll know if you're eligible and what you can expect from our grant programs. So we'll just hop right into this. So we are the local park grant program. Our main objective is to acquire and develop public parkland. Actually, the biggest benefit of our program is that whenever we fund a project, that property has to remain parkland in perpetuity. And so that means it's going to be a park forever. So that's the number one goal, is to acquire and develop those parks for your local communities so we can get folks outdoors and create a sense of community. And it's just, parks are a good thing. So we're really trying to get those out across the state. And what better way to do that in your neighborhoods so that folks can access that. The way our program works is a 50-50 matching grant. So that means for every dollar that you put in, we put in for $1. So this is a true partnership between Parks and Wildlife and your local communities. And it's all based on reimbursement. That's a big key here. So we don't show up with a big check and a bunch of balloons, and we're not the Publishers Clearinghouse here. We are going to be working with you throughout the grant project, and it's all based on reimbursement. So you as the local community will have to pay for the project up front, show your expenses, and then we will reimburse you at the 50% rate. And it is all through a competitive application process. We have our scoring criteria that Matt and Susan are going to go through here in just a little bit. And so those are the kind of qualities we're looking for in a project. And then we rank those based on their merits. And that's how you're going to get funded. And we'll start at the top from the highest score, and we'll just go down the list until we run out of monies. And those are going to be the projects that we recommend to our Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission for final approval. Okay. And just one thing to mention here. So we talk about acquisition and development. So with acquisition, we do fund acquisition only projects. Now, part of that will be that, we can acquire property now. And if this, community is not ready to develop it for a little while, we can still help you acquire that. We will just ask that you have some kind of a plan for the future, and you kind of explain to us what your ideas and thoughts are for that property into the future, because this is dedicated parkland. It needs to be open and accessible to the public. And so if you are just acquiring a piece of property, we'll have to have some kind of idea how it will be open and accessible. And then there's acquisition and development. So if you're going to acquire it now and you have already a master plan in place and you're ready to develop it at the same time, then we can do that as well. So we can help with part of the acquisition and then also partially fund the development of that project. And then with just development, let's say you have a piece of property that you own and you want to develop it as a park, we can do straight development. But one thing to note is it's not just development of new facilities. We do renovation projects as well. A lot of you folks have parks that you already have in your communities that may just need some love or some updating or some new facilities. We can help do renovation projects. And we actually like to see that. Our program has been around since the late 60s, early 70s. So a lot of the parks in your communities we have funded in the past. And a lot of those facilities have outlived their useful life, and you want to give an update. So we can help with renovations as well. So keep going here. So who we fund and how much can we give? So we have our 5 different grant programs within local parks. You can see them there on the left. We have small community grant. As Dan mentioned, those are, for communities less than 20,000. We have our non-urban program. We have an indoor and an outdoor program. However, the indoor program, we don't offer that every year, and it's mainly based on funding available. So for this next year, we're just not going to have the funds available to do indoor projects. So we're going to just open up the non-urban outdoor program. And so that's for communities of 500,000 or less. So something to really note here is, a small community that has less than 20,000, they can apply for the non-urban outdoor program. It's just it doesn't go the other way. Non-urbans can't obviously apply for small communities. So yeah, the small community, if you do have a project that's going to be more expensive or a higher grant ceiling, and you're asking for some more dollars, then you can apply for the non-urban. And then again, last, urban projects. Urban program is for those larger communities, the major metros, larger counties and cities of greater than 500,000. And we're not going to open the indoor for that one this year as well. So you'll see there that the grant deadline is October 1st, and that's going to be at 5 p.m. And that will be the cutoff. The system automatically shuts off at 5 p.m. So you're going to want to start working on your applications and getting your account set up. And we'll walk through that a little bit more as we go on, but just make sure that you have all your your ducks in a row before October 1st, because that will cut off at 5 p.m. And if the ball beats you to the base, then it beats you to the base. So the grant ceilings, so 150,000 is how much that Parks and Wildlife can put in. So we just mentioned that it's a 50-50 grant program. So in order to get the 150,000 of Parks and Wildlife money for a small community, the total project cost would have to be 300,000. And again, it's on reimbursement. So you would put up the 300,000 and then you would ask for reimbursement. Same with non-urban. If it's 750,000 of our monies, that means the total project cost would have to be 1.5 million. And so with urban, with 1.5 million of our money, it'd be 3 million total project cost to get the full grant ceiling amount. Okay. So who's eligible to apply? Basically, it's any local municipal government or local government entity, cities, counties, river authorities. We do work with municipal utility districts, and there's a variety of other special districts. The main thing to think about with those types of districts is, as long as it's within your bylaws to provide public recreation to the citizens you support, that's what we're going to be looking for. So if you're a member of one of those special districts or a MUD, you're going to want to reach out to us and just kind of talk with us ahead of time so we can make sure that you are truly eligible, and we'll be really looking for your bylaws that say that you provide recreation to those citizens. All right, and the real reason, the reason we only fund government entities is, again, it goes back to our #1 objective, and that's to provide public parkland in perpetuity. So the only real ways and means for us to do that is to work with entities that have the authority to, dedicate that property in perpetuity. And so we'll want to see resolutions for that. Before you can apply, you will have to pass a resolution through city councils, your county commissions, your boards, or however that structure is for you. You would have to pass a resolution that says you will dedicate that property in perpetuity. It also says that it would also say that you have the match readily available. So again, if your project is for a small community, if it's $300,000 and you're going for the full 150,000 of our monies, we want to see that you have those monies readily available so that when you're awarded a grant, that you can actually follow through with the development or the acquisition, and then we can reimburse after that. Okay. So eligible costs, we kind of mentioned a little bit, acquisition of land. The way that would work is if you have a piece of property you want to acquire, you would submit that to us in your application, and then you would have to do an appraisal, and then we would look at the appraised value, and that's the value we would use as the match and for the reimbursement purposes. Again, new construction and renovation. And one thing that's key that we really want to mention is professional services. So we do provide monies for professional services, and our max is 12% of the construction cost. And so that's going to be really important. We're going to be talking about timelines here in a minute. And, you know, we do have policies and requirements that require permits and design engineers designs. And so all those things cost money. And so we want to be able to help support that. But we are just going to be able to support 12% of the construction costs. But either way, that will definitely help with some of those folks that need to help funding some of those surveys or design fees. So we can't fund everything. So we do have some ineligible costs. So we like to just mention those right now. So if your project involves any of these here, we're just not going to be able to fund those, mainly because it's not really as part of the manuals and part of what we're really looking to fund. And there's a lot of other opportunities for these types of things through other grant programs. And so we do not fund these types, mainly like non-native plant species. The reasoning for that is, you know, we are a natural resource agency, and so we are not going to support non-native plants. So we will only reimburse native species. That does not mean you cannot plant non-native plants as part of your project. We just will not reimburse those with our funds. Restoration of historic structures. Again, we don't get into the business of historic sites and structures. And so there are other programs through the Texas Historical Commission that can help you with that. So we just don't focus on those things. Pro and semi-pro facilities, you know, if Jerry Jones came to us to expand the AT&T Center, that's just something we will not be able to fund. Amusement parks is another thing we just won't get in the business of. Residences and furnishings, yeah, we just don't. We can have some maintenance yards and things like that as part of your project, but we're not going to fund a residence for the park site. Yeah, lodges, hotels, luxury cabins, just not part of what we do in our purview. Monuments and landmarks, again, there's a THC and there's other programs for those types of things. Public art, same situation. They're just not necessarily, they're not really recreational, direct recreational facilities, and just something we don't really support. And anything that would be along those lines that would support any one of these ineligible costs, we will not include those. They can be part of a project in some circumstances, and they can be included as overmatch or outside of the grant scope. But you're going to want to call and talk to us ahead of time just to make sure that what you're proposing will actually line up with our grant requirements and what we're looking for in a competitive application. So what are some eligible costs? Really, if you think about it, anything that you would normally see in a public park, you know, ball fields, basketball, playgrounds, splash pads, swimming pools. We do interpretive signage. We actually really like interpretive signage that, you know, gives information about the natural or coastal landscape and the history of a site or the natural components of a site. We like to see that. Again, native plants, pavilions, disc golf, all those things. Dog parks, RV parks, trails. Again, just pretty much anything that you would think of that you would see in a normal public park. We have the ability to fund those. But there is a distinction we would like to make, and there's what we call recreational elements, and then we also have what's called support facilities. And we'll talk about those as we go through the scoring criteria. But the main difference is, you know, a support facility would be something like restrooms or parking areas. You know, they're part of the project and they're necessary for a public park, but they don't have a direct recreational value as compared to, say, you know, like a soccer field, right? So if two applications came in and one person was wanting to fund a soccer field and another person was wanting to fund a restroom, we would actually give priority points to the soccer field because that's direct recreation. Now, we're not saying restrooms aren't important, but that's just how we define and give priority preference to, is we really want to focus on the recreational elements as opposed to the support facilities. Okay, so our funding sources, we need to talk about this a little bit. So we have two pots of money. We have our state money and then we have our federal money. So the state money comes through the sporting goods sales tax. Some of you might be familiar with the sporting goods sales tax. Just a couple of years ago, we had a constitutional amendment that dedicated the sporting goods sales tax to Parks and Wildlife, with a portion of that going to the Texas Historical Commission. And so what sporting goods sales tax is whenever a person goes out and buys a tennis racket, a baseball mitt, glove, camping equipment, any of those types of equipment that they can use for outdoor sporting goods or just getting outdoors, the state comptroller, they basically look at all the sales tax, and then they'll do their magic dust and their algorithms, and they'll come up with what they estimate as what was spent on sporting goods. And then that's how we get funded to help support our Texas State Parks, our programs at Parks and Wildlife, as well as this program for the local parks. And it makes sense because think about it, if we're building soccer fields or baseball fields and our campgrounds, those folks are going to go out and buy that equipment to use those facilities, and it's just going to keep perpetuating the funds. So it's actually a really great program that we have here. And that's actually broken up into 2 different programs. There's the Texas Recreation and Parks account, which that's what's going to be used to fund the small communities and then the non-urban communities. And then we have the Texas Large County Municipality Recreation account, and that's strictly for the urban account. So at the federal level, we do get money from the National Park Service, and that's through a program called the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We also get monies from the Gulf of Mexico Energies and Securities Act, but those all basically come from the offshore oil and gas royalties. And something that's really interesting that happened just last year in August, the president signed into law the Great American Outdoors Act. And that is really similar to what we did in Texas with the sporting goods sales tax. Essentially, at the federal level, they were allocating funds and on an allocation basis, whereas now with the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, that's a full dedication. So when those funds come in, they break it out to the states based on a percentage, and it can't be diverted for other things other than the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So that's a really good plus for us. Our budgets are looking pretty good at the federal level right now. So we're going to be funding a lot more projects with federal dollars, and we'll want to talk about that a little bit more in detail. So let's go into a little more detail on that. So like I was mentioning, the urban and non-urban grants, you can really expect a lot more federal monies from the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So with that Great American Outdoors Act, and with Texas being as large of a state as we are, we get a pretty good size apportionment from that fund every year. And so we're going to be using a lot more federal dollars on projects. So the main thing to think about with that is when you go to the National Park Service, there's going to be a lot more requirements and a lot more legwork for you all at the community level, especially during the application phase. Because, what they say, more money, more problems, right? So at the federal level, they've come up with new grant manuals, new policies, and new forms and requirements as part of those new dollars coming in. And so we got to do a lot more legwork on the front side. And some of the things to think about are like the permitting requirements. One of the biggest changes was in the past, if we funded a project through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, we could work out any archaeological surveys or any environmental concerns, those types of permitting or requirement. We used to be able to do those during the grant period of performance. After we got a grant agreement, we would just have a special condition saying that construction can't begin until those permits were completed. Well, a big change is that those permits are going to now have to be done prior to receiving a grant agreement from the National Park Service and ultimately funneled down to you all at the local communities. Because that's how it works, is actually you will not deal with the National Park Service. The Parks and Wildlife is the pass-through entity. So you at the local level will only deal with us at Parks and Wildlife, but Parks and Wildlife, we have an agreement with the National Park Service. And so we're just the intermediary that funnels the monies down to you. But again, there's going to be a lot more permitting requirements that need to be done ahead of time. So as we start going through the scoring criteria, you need to keep that in your mind and thinking about your project. And one thing to note is we mentioned professional services. That's going to be key in some of this permitting or surveying that may be required for your project. You can do those surveys and start working through those permits ahead of grant application and actually the grant agreement. And then you would just include what's called a pre-agreement date in your application, which means, hey, we did these surveys prior to application, but we would like to get those funds reimbursed at the 50% rate if we're awarded a grant. So yeah, really, that's going to be a big change that's been happening. And so there's a lot more planning involved for those urban and non-urban accounts. Sure. And some other things you need to think about is publicly owned non-park land. So what that is if a community owns a piece of property, then maybe say they acquired it to build a fire station at some point. Well, maybe they decided not to build the fire station. And so now they have this piece of property that they don't know what they were going to do with it. They didn't have it platted or any kind of plan to develop a park on that property. They just have it. Well, now they're starting to think, hey, maybe that would be a good place for a public park. So we can use the value of that property as match, but only for state-funded grants. The feds at the National Park Service, they will not allow that. And so that's just one thing to think about while you're looking at if your project does involve publicly owned non-park land. We can work with leased properties, but at the national level, they will only allow for properties that's leased from another federal government entity. So an example would be like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Let's say you're a community on a lake that has, that's ran and owned by the Corps, and you're just leasing the public park space from them. You can apply for that, but like doing leases with school districts or other entities, it gets really muddy, and the National Park Service isn't going to want to deal with that. So if that is something that's involved with your project or something you're considering, you're definitely going to want to call us ahead of time so that we can work out those details. The good news is, with small communities, we usually try to fund those mainly with the sporting goods sales tax. So that should be some less red tape or requirements, especially for the smaller communities that might have not as many resources to do some of that. So upcoming deadlines, the applications are open, and the deadline will be October 1st at 5 p.m. That's for all of the programs. And again, at 5 p.m. it automatically shuts off. So you're going to want to start working on your applications now, start developing those in the Argo 2020 system. And if you haven't gotten set up in the Argo 2020 system yet, you're going to want to start working through that process and get your sponsor organization created. And Blake will talk about that in just a minute, but that's something you're going to want to do now so that you can actually start developing your application. So we have changed our timelines a little bit. So these past couple of years, we've had a lot of changes. We've done scoring criteria updates. With COVID-19 last year, it really threw off a lot of our timelines. And so we've had some different grant application deadlines in the past, but normally October 1st was our normal process and our normal date that we would accept applications. So we're trying to get back onto a normal schedule. And so October 1st is why we decided that deadline for this year. And so the timeline for that is, you apply October 1, and then the local park grant team will start reviewing applications. We'll be looking at the scoring criteria. We'll start scoring, and we'll provide our recommendations for what projects that we recommend for funding to the Parks and Wildlife Commission. That's going to happen throughout the fall and into the early part of the winter and the first part of 2022. And then after we have our recommended projects, we need to send those projects to our resource biologist here at Parks and Wildlife, and they're going to do a review of your application just to make sure that what you're proposing isn't going to impact any natural resources negatively, or if that you have a plan or any permits that will be required as part of your project. They're going to review your applications for that. And then we also send all your applications to the Texas Historical Commission so that they can review it to make sure that we're not impacting any cultural resources as a part of your project. So those are all things that we're going to be working in between October and March of 2022. And in March of 2022, we'll have our recommendations to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission, and they'll give final approval. So that's usually towards the end of March that you will actually know if you've been awarded funding or not. And then from there, I just like to give you all a timeline for expectations. If you are awarded in March of 2022, then we need to start working on the grant agreement process. And that's another reason why we went to the October 1 deadline and the March commission date, is because at the federal level, they only open up certain windows for us as Parks and Wildlife to submit your applications to them for funding. And so they usually do that twice in the spring, once in the spring and once in the summer. And so if by getting the March commission approval date, it allows us to get those projects in quicker and actually start working through the federal application process. Whereas if we waited till the next commission date, which is in May, that really only gives us one window in the summer to apply to the National Park Service, which really, really crunches timelines, and it's really difficult to actually administer that. So that's why we're doing that for the federal level. And then at the state level, we can usually turn around grant agreements a lot quicker because it's just internal with Parks and Wildlife and you at the local community. But let's just say you apply and you're awarded in March. A state agreement, you can usually look at a state agreement by the summer of 2022. You should be able to start rocking and rolling on your project. Now at the federal level, with all the changes and all the new requirements, it could possibly be summer of 2022. It could also be potentially fall of 2022 before you would actually get a grant agreement and actually be able to start working. So that just gives you a very high level timeline. You apply in October 1, but it could be late summer, maybe late fall of 2022 before you'd actually be able to start working, because construction cannot begin on a project until we have a grant agreement in place. Okay, so that's just a high level overview of timeline, just so we can manage expectations. So the next section is going to be Blake. He's going to come up and talk about the RGO 2020 online business system. And this is how we do business moving forward. So everybody on here is going to have to be working in that system moving forward. All right, Blake, here you go.
Hey, everybody. My name is Blake Powers. I'm the systems analyst here at Texas Parks and Wildlife. For recreation grants, I design and administer the ARGO 2020 grant management system. This is a system where we evaluate applications, and also, if you've ever applied for anything, you know how those systems kind of work, but this one also has the unique aspect of being a project management system, both from the sponsor side and from our side. So in that regard, it is a little bit unique. We're just going to talk about some high-level things that you need to prepare for as you get ready to prepare your grant application. And we're not going to go into an extended ARGO 2020 seminar today, but there are lots of resources online where you can learn more about the technical aspects of that program. First off, let's talk about what ARGO 2020 is. ARGO 2020 is a term we use because we formerly had a recreation grants online system that has recently been decommissioned. This system will eventually just be called ARGO, as well as the old one was. But for now, we needed a way to separate the two systems since we had them at the same time. But ARGO 2020 is a digital portal that we use to accept, review, and score grant applications, and then manage those applications that become awarded or active projects through the duration of the grant management lifecycle. So as we talked about, a little unique in the sense that you both submit your application, it is a scoring system, but it is also a project management system. Some key elements of ARGO 2020, when you get ready to sign up for an account in the system, you're going to need to do so on behalf of a sponsor organization. Those of you that haven't applied with us in a few years, who are used to the old system, and the old system, anybody could go in and create a grant application. In the new system, it must be tied to a sponsor who is eligible to receive a grant. So you're no longer able to go in to the system and apply for a grant without creating an account for your actual organization. Within that account, you need to select someone to be the administrator. That is basically the person who will manage the users in the organization, the person who will start applications for the organization, and then the person at a higher level of authority who has the ability to submit quarterly reports, amendment requests, and requests for payment. That does not necessarily need to be only one person, but it's generally a good idea to have one or two sponsor administrators, and then you can elevate people on the application itself to be an administrator, which we'll cover in a minute. When you ask for an account in ARGO 2020, we review all of those individually. That is an attempt to make sure that the user pool is accurate in the new system. In the old system, we had a significant issue with that. So our goal in the new system has been to keep the users who are part of the system as actual users and the organizations as actual organizations, so that we have a good idea that there's not a lot of errant data in the system. Once those accounts are approved, you can, as a sponsor administrator, select to join new people to your organization, or they can simply request to join the system as a part of your organization. That's all detailed in the resources I'll show you in a minute. The organization administrator can initiate a new grant application. That's key. You're going to need to be the organization administrator to start a grant application. However, once the application is started, the folks in your organization who are designated as staff can work on it. Okay, So it's fine for them. They'll see it. They'll be able to work on it if they're staff members once it's started, but they can't start one if they are merely sponsor staff. They have to be an administrator. You can also assign and remove members of your organization, and you can edit and save documents in your application. The application administrator, and that's key. The word application is key because this does not mean the organization can create 10 applications, and as the administrator, you could have a different project manager on all of them. So the idea is if somebody's running the project lead for a particular application, you can elevate their privileges to the administrator on that application. They can edit and save documents within the application. They can assign and remove members from the application, and then they can submit the application. Okay. The organization and account users, the people affiliated with a local unit of government that receives the grant funding. These can include city managers, mayors, county staff, parks, department, etc. And then the application users are the people responsible for completing the application, and they're selected by the appropriate account user. They can be either from your organization or from an outside organization, such as a consultant organization. You have 3 roles available to you in the system at the organization and the application level, and they are administrator, staff, and viewer. We've talked about the differences between administrator and staff. The viewer is simply somebody you would add in that role so that they could just look at stuff. They wouldn't necessarily be editing or uploading anything. You do not need an account to look at the public resources in the system. We'll go over where those are in a moment. You simply need to be able to get to the Argo 2020 resources page, which we'll look at. And then to work on an organization's application, if you're a consultant, the consultant creates a user account, joins the system in the grant consultant's organization. Our staff reviews and approves the request, and then the organization's administrator can add you to the application if you are a consultant. If you want to apply for currently available grant or manage existing grant, you can access Argo 2020 by visiting our TPWD Rec Grants website and choosing the Apply Manage link, and we'll go over that in a moment. If you already have an account for your sponsor organization or user role, you can log in with that account, view and apply for the available grant opportunities that are currently there. And if you don't have an account for your organization, you'll need to request one. This is a point that Aaron stressed earlier. Don't wait to the last minute. These applications are extremely, there's a lot of information that's required, and this system actually spots errors and won't let you submit an application that's incomplete or that contains errors. So if you come into the system on the last day and you've compiled all of your grant information in Word documents, you still might not get your application in on time. I assure you, we have had folks miss the deadline for that reason. So just give yourself plenty of time, factor this into your project planning, get into the system now. Even if your application, you're not going to start it right away, be sure that you're set up to do so whenever you're ready to proceed. And one thing about the error checks, the required fields should be completed within the system parameters, especially the budget form. That form tends to trip people up if they're new applicants. Making the numbers work is an important part of getting your application submitted. So this means it'll take some time to complete. They may require technical support, and again, account for that in your project planning. And this says break time, but before we go to break, I'm actually going to let me see. I'm going to see if I can take the presentation screen to another computer here. Okay, I'll just work in this one if I can. Okay, we'll do that. Okay, so what we're looking at now is the this is how you'll access the Argo 2020 grant management system. If you know how to get to the recreation grants online portal through your bookmarks, that's great. If you have no idea, you can simply type rec grants TPWD, and the search results are going to show you our page here at Texas Parks and Wildlife. You can look, some of you right off of Google will see the apply manage link. If you got to our website a different way, that's fine too. The first link here is how you get to the Argo 2020 portal here, okay? There is no link to the old Argo system anymore, so there's no possibility of confusion in that way if you simply follow the link, okay? Takes just a moment for this to pull up. So this is the login page for Argo 2020, everyone. And one thing I want you to notice is without even logging into the system, without requesting a new account or anything, there's a resources tab here. So if you're curious about resources that are pertinent to this year's Local Parks Grant application, you're going to notice bookmark number 3 here says Local Parks Grant Program Resources, and you're going to see a host of resources here, right? The 2021 application PDF is there. We'll have the 2022 available soon. And then the rest of the items on this page, many of them are linked from the application itself, okay? So this is where you'll get your programmatic resources, even if you don't have an account yet. If you just want to look at the application and get an idea of what kinds of things are required, this is the place you'll do that. If you do have an account and you've gone through the new user process and you've received that account and you log in, I'm going to go ahead and use my test sponsor account. This is what the system looks like when you first log in, okay? And what you'll notice is depending on how your screen is set up, you're always going to see these two things, view available opportunities or your inbox. If you've got something to do, for those of you that already have a grant in the system, you'll have a task list and you're familiar with that. But for folks who are just now going to apply for a local parks grant 2022, you'll look at the available opportunities by clicking view opportunities, just as I did. And here's the one for Local Parks 2022. I'll go ahead and apply now. It'll ask you to agree that you're initiating a 2022 Local Parks grant application. There is a maximum of 2 applications allowed per organization, okay? So if you create 2 applications, that's all the system will let you create, unless there's a special designation. And if there is, you'll want to reach out to the grant program team here and we'll determine whether or not that qualifies for an exemption. But as you can see here, this is a very detailed application, right? And this is why we were expressing to you that you're going to want to start early and make sure that you leave yourself plenty of time. There's nothing more disappointing to have all your ducks in a row and then you just didn't get into the system in time and you don't get your application in. So plan accordingly. And should you run into questions about this process, okay, you're always going to see this Argo 2020 resources link right here on the top right-hand portion of your page. Of course, we talked about earlier the Local Parks Grant Program resources, but if you scroll down just a bit, you're going to see an area called the Quick Start User Guide. This area is for applicants, right? This is not for awarded projects. This is just the aspects of an application. So we covered how to access the login page. We talked about how to request the access for your sponsor organization. The rest of these will detail how to add other folks, how to apply for the grant opportunities, which is what you just saw me do. That's a very quick and simple process. But then section 5 will interest you, how to add and remove users from a grant application. If you are going to be using a consultant on your application, you're going to want to make sure that you're familiar with section 5 here. Section 6 talks about how to view and edit this and save the forms. And then section 7, how to submit. There is no submit button anymore. That's good because you can complete the forms in the application in any order that you choose. However, the application has to be submitted using the status change feature in the new system. That is very important. Be sure you're familiar with section 7 because unsubmitted grant applications will not be scored and cannot be considered for award, okay? That'd be another area. You would not want to accidentally not turn in your grant application, and you are responsible for reviewing these instructions and using the system specifically to submit your application. 2 more sections here, how to create a full print version of your grant application, and then section 9 is a special one for the system relative to grant consultants. So this is pretty much how the system works. You'll have a pretty simple home screen. You'll have the resources should you need them, and really that's going to be most of the extent of what you're dealing with when you're dealing with the Recreation Grants online system. So at this point, let's see if we can find the oh, screen. Of course it did. Here. Okay. So we'll pop back into our slide presentation here. Like we said, allow yourself plenty of time. And then if you have questions, there are lots of available links inside the Argo 2020 system where you can simply click support and those emails get to me. You can always email us at rec.grants@tpwd.texas.gov. Those questions get to me. And there are a lot of support resources for you here to help you finish your application and get it submitted. And that's the goal of the support that I'll be providing you and the system itself. So I think that's really all I have. It looks like we're set up after this for a break. Is that correct, everybody? Okay. So it looks like we're going to take, is it a 10-minute break? And then we'll be rejoining you. If you have questions in the meantime, feel free to type those into the questions area. Those questions will be available after the webinar too, for us to answer if we're not able to get to them during the course of the webinar. And that's a way for you to be sure that you get your particular questions answered in some kind of timeline. So we'll take a quick 10-minute break and we'll be back at, let's call it 2:35.
Welcome back, everyone. So let's go ahead and get started on the remainder of the workshop. For any of those out there that don't know who I am, my name is Matt Fugere, and I am one of the local park grant coordinators. And to start off, I just want to take a moment to reiterate Blake and Aaron. Please don't wait until the last minute. As the clock strikes 5 p.m. Central Standard Time on October 1st, the application round is closed. So go ahead and be sure to start the application process as soon as possible and submit as soon as you're able before the deadline. With that, let's get going on the scoring criteria. In this portion of the presentation, we'll be discussing the adopted scoring criteria. This was adopted by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission in 2019. We have now experienced 2 rounds of applications under the new criteria. So this criteria was developed over a 2-year period with multiple rounds of public input from across the state. Many of you were likely involved with this process. If you were, thank you again for participating. And now, after seeing 2 rounds of applications, we've been pleased with the overall quality of the projects. So the local park scoring criteria is categorized as 5 core values: excellence, integrity, service, stewardship, and teamwork. These 5 core values are derived from the Texas Parks and Wildlife values as published in the Diversity and Inclusion and the Land and Water Conservation Plan. Each core value is weighted differently, ranging from 30% for service to 10% for teamwork. Together, they equal a 100-point scale. We're going to examine each of these categories in greater detail in the coming slides. The first category we'll look at is excellence. Excellence is worth a total of 25 points. In this category, applications are scored according to the provided goals and objectives, worth 10 points, timeline and cost, worth 5 points, and site design, worth 10 points. We're going to be discussing each of these in turn. When evaluating goals and objectives, we're looking for what are referred to as SMART goals. And that is goals and objectives that are specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, and they're timely. Well-defined SMART goals will both clearly explain the local priorities to be addressed by the proposed project, and will also illustrate how the proposed project, if funded, will support Texas Parks and Wildlife Land and Water Resources Conservation and Recreation Plan, the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan, and the local park grant program objectives as applicable. In other words, we want to know why you're building this park, how you're going to do it, and how does it fit within the mission of Texas Parks and Wildlife. And we want to know how all of this fits within the parameters of our program. In this past round, the best scoring applications explicitly linked their project goals with those found within the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan and or Texas Parks and Wildlife's Land and Water Plan. The second subcategory of excellence is timeline and cost. Timeline and cost is worth up to 5 points. Our timelines are really important because our funding for projects, as veterans of this process know, expires after 3 or 4 years. We also cannot allow construction before our grant agreements are in hand. So we want to know how y'all will get the project done and how you will comply with our timelines. For our purposes, the best projects are those that can quickly meet all pre-construction tasks and compliance issues, but can afford to delay construction for a while, if necessary, while we undergo the lengthy pre-agreement compliance phase. In short, the best fit are often shovel-ready projects that can sit on ice for while the many levels of government chug along. This is especially true in this upcoming round. The federal apportionment of land and water conservation funds, we just refer to it usually as LWCF, have increased in recent years, as have the project requirements. We love the federal dollars, but it is worth noting that the timeline between the award and when the grant agreement is signed is typically quite a bit longer for our federally funded projects. A really good timeline will take this into account, this potentiality. Similarly, a budget that is both feasible and credible in terms of land acquisition or construction is equally important for ensuring that the project is applied for is the project that ends up being built. In this past round, the best scoring applications provided timelines that took local park procedures into account, had verified budgets produced from a professional secondary source, such as an engineer or an architect, often including preliminary construction quotes, and were consistent across the entire application through project scope, narrative, and site plan. Please note that our question for the timeline has changed in the application. We have additional prompts to help you craft your answer. We have also added a question about how you derived your cost estimates. The third subcategory in excellence is site design. Site design is worth up to 10 points. Site design refers specifically to the site map. Now we're looking at two things when evaluating site design. First, the proposed site plan and boundary map are clear, easy to read, and contain all information requested in the application. The "is it clear" test is worth up to 5 points. Second, we're looking to see, does the proposed development prioritize direct recreational opportunities? Now, we prefer to fund projects that maximize funds for acquisition, recreation, and conservation opportunities. And this came up in a question earlier in the chat. The 5 points available are determined by dividing the direct acquisition, recreational, and conservation costs by the total project cost and multiplying the result by 5. In more simple terms, this is where recreational elements are given priority over the support elements. It is also worth noting that acquisition-only projects should go ahead and include conceptual plans and a schedule for future development. Now, when we say site design must be clear and easy to read, we're not necessarily giving points based on how professional or fancy the plan looks. We're giving points based on whether or not the site plan contains the information we're looking for. For example, the site plan you see in this slide was done in Microsoft Paint. Although not done by a professional designer, it is a good plan in that we can see where all the grant elements will go. You can see numbers 1 through 6. We can see where it is located, and we can see that the design has been thought out. It is missing one thing that would ding it in scoring, though, and some of you may have already guessed it. It is missing a boundary line. Conversely, this site plan is for the same site as the last slide, but was prepared by a trained landscape architect. Although this plan may be more aesthetically pleasing, the major difference, for the purposes of scoring anyway, is that the boundary line is clear on this site plan. Other than that, the two plans are equal in our eyes. Looking at this site plan, this is an opportunity to discuss a visual example of recreational elements versus support elements. In this design, excuse me, excuse me. In this design, the parking lot and the restroom being the red square just north of the parking lot, those are the support costs. The rest of the elements, including the pavilion, splash pad, excuse me, pathways, and native prairie restoration are recreational costs. Once again, although parking lots and restrooms are necessary for a publicly accessible functioning park and are eligible expenses, the priority is to fund recreational elements. Moreover, when evaluating site plans, we also look to ensure that the development is appropriate for the site in its context. We will be discussing this more contextual evaluation in the conservation, sustainability, and SME sections. The second scoring criteria category is integrity. Overall, 15 points are available. Within this category, we are judging applications by organizational capacity, 0 to 5 points, and past performance, 0 to 10 points. First, we're going to take a look at organizational capacity. Organizational capacity is worth 5 points. We rate organizational capacity in 2 ways. 1, in terms of grant administration, and 2, in terms of future care and maintenance. In the application, these are addressed as 2 distinct questions. Please ensure that on the application that you do answer both. When evaluating the first, grant administration, we are looking for evidence that the applying organization has the ability, through qualified staff and resources, to manage and implement the project when it is active, from inception to completion. Conversely, if the entity lacks these resources, we want to make sure and check to see if the applicant has effectively described any partnerships that may be in place to secure these resources. And for the second, in terms of future care and maintenance, we are looking for evidence that the organization has the ability and resources in place to keep the park well maintained after project completion. And if they don't, do they have a plan in place to secure those resources? In the application, we will be ask you to describe the resources that you do have in place currently, and also what processes you might have to ensure short-term and long-term project success in the event of staff turnover. The best scoring applications from the past round included not only a list of dedicated staff members and the respective level of experience, but they also included detailed short and long-term maintenance plans specific to the project. The second subcategory in integrity is past performance. Past performance is worth 10 points. For any of you first-time applicants, congratulations. You automatically receive the 10 points. If an applicant is in full compliance with the conditions of any previously funded and active recreation grants awarded by the department, you also receive the full 10 points. Conversely, for those applicants not presently in full compliance, this does not mean you cannot apply. Our evaluation is based on a relative scale from 0 to 10. For example, a missing sign is a lot less severe than a major conversion. So the missing sign will likely only result in a point or 2 of deduction. Remember, how you prepare for this section and how you earn points, it is determined by your actions leading up to the application, not exactly what you put forth in the application itself. Communication and the ability to work with us through any issues that may arise is really what's most important. The third category, and the one with the most available points, is service. Service is worth 30 points total and does include 4 subcategories. Those categories are community need, worth 0 to 10 points, geographic distribution, worth 5 potential points, underserved populations, worth 0 to 10 points, and accessibility, worth 0 to 5 points. The first subcategory of service is community need. Once again, this is worth 10 points. In looking at community need, we are rating the applications based on how well they identify and document a recreational gap that the proposed project will fill. A typical method for doing this is with the park master plan. For our non-urban and urban applications, you automatically get 5 points for having a Texas Parks and Wildlife compliant master plan on file at the time of application. You can get another 5 points by telling us how you're using this information specific to the project, such as detailed needs assessment, staff recommendation, or a threat of a lost opportunity. For those without a Texas Parks and Wildlife approved master plan, don't be too discouraged. You can still earn up to 5 points in the category by demonstrating thoughtful community outreach and planning, and by demonstrating with compelling evidence and argument that your project scope meets these needs. We do recognize the effect the pandemic may have had on gathering public input. So we're open to creative ways of soliciting public engagement, such as online public meetings and surveys. Now, in contrast to the non-urban outdoor and urban applications, our small community applications do not have the same park master plan requirements. 5 points are available for how well they document and describe the needs assessment process, define community need, and provide a detail on the public input process, regardless of whether this is combined into a single park master plan. Now, however, many small communities do still submit a park master plan, and it is something that we definitely encourage. Another 5 points is available to small community applicants for identifying other methods of needs assessment, such as staff recommendations or threat of a lost opportunity. The second subcategory under service is geographic distribution. Geographic distribution is worth 5 points. Because part of the local park's mission is to spread recreation opportunities to underserved areas of the state, the projects that will provide the first public park in the applicant's jurisdiction, these automatically do receive the full 5 points. Now, for projects that don't receive the automatic points, we're rating the applications on 2 criteria. One, how well the project fills a critical parks and recreation gap within the service area. This is worth 3 points. Now, it's important to note that the identified gap must be identified through research, public input, or other means. The second criteria is how accessible the project is to the public via multiple methods of transportation. This includes examples of being walking, biking, public transportation, etc. Now, this is worth 2 points. In the application, you'll be asked to describe your service area. This service area should describe the community referenced and served in the community needs section. It will also determine the demographic information for your application. For those smaller communities, the service area is typically pretty clear. However, if you are a large city or county, please approach this question carefully, especially if your park does not serve the entire jurisdiction. If it does serve a specific area of the city or county, go ahead and tell us what that service area is. Examples of this include a particular zip code, a group of census block groups, or an area between highways, etc. So this is the quoted prompt from the application. Define and explain your project service area in terms of its geographic boundaries. If you are a large city or county, please be sure to include if the park is serving a particular precinct, planning district, zip code, etc. If you represent a small community, please include if your service area includes the entire city boundary or just a portion. Note, this information will determine the boundaries of your demographic data included for points under the community needs section of the scoring criteria. To help us understand what you are determining as your service area, we have added an upload field for the service area map. The third subcategory of service is underserved populations. Underserved populations is worth 10 points. In this category, we're looking at how well the project will serve low-income citizens. Low-income citizens being defined as the percent of households making less than $35,000 per year. This is based on economic data for the service area from the most recent federal census and is determined by multiplying the percentage of low-income population by 5 points being the highest. For this, the newest census is, if the data is available for the new 2020 census, we'll be using that. If not, we'll go back to the latest American Community Survey data, and that's what we'll be using to determine these metrics. We are also looking at how well the project will serve ethnic minority citizens. These are defined as percent of a population that does not select white alone on the US Census. Demographic data for the service area from the most recent federal census is utilized here as well. Again, the score is calculated by multiplying the percentage of the population qualifying as minority by 5, with 5 points being the highest. This criteria is one of the few categories not ranked on a relative scale, but is instead based exclusively on economic and demographic data. In the past years, we asked you to furnish your own data here, even though we verified each applicant's figures ourselves. But this year, we will be calculating these on your behalf during scoring based on the service area you provide. The final subcategory under service is accessibility. Accessibility is worth 5 points. In this section, we are rating applications on how well the proposed project provides park and recreational opportunities for disabled citizens, which exceed the federal and state required accessibility standards. Remember, just reemphasize that this is for projects that exceed the minimum. In other words, the federal and state requirements for accessibility are expected of all projects. These points are available to projects that explicitly go beyond, above and beyond ADA requirements. So this concludes my portion of the presentation. To review the final criteria categories and to finish out the slides, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my fellow grant coordinator, Susan Sharp.
Good afternoon, folks. We are almost done with this. Please bear with us, and please continue to put those questions in the question box, and we will do our best to get those answered. So my name is Susan Sharp. I am the only person you've heard from so far today that does not have a beard, and I've drank a lot of iced coffee, so just everyone bear with me. We'll get through this together. All right, let's go. So the next scoring criteria category we have here is stewardship, and that contains 2 subcategories. One is for conservation and one is for sustainable design. These are important categories to us here. Again, we are a natural resources agency, so that's why we have so many points here, and we just want to encourage you to look at how you can integrate these into your projects. So for conservation, you can score up to 10 points, and our scoring criteria itself says that the proposed project actively protects or restores critical ecosystems and incorporates elements that cultivate support for and awareness of natural and cultural resources. We actually apply stewardship points to a few areas in the application. The first is for conservation activities included in the project scope, and explored in the project narrative. The second area is for the quality of the information provided in the environmental information and impact section of the application. In terms of scope, so to go to the first point, in terms of scope, we can consider actions included in the budget that protect or restore lands, and or those that support or increase awareness of cultural and natural resources. Acquisition of lands is one way to do this. Our objective is to put these parks under protection in perpetuity. But we can also give points for restoring highly impacted areas. So the second area where you can score some points for conservation in our applications is in the environmental information and impact sections. So in terms of information, we're just really concerned with how the project will fare with regards to environmental permits. Today, we've talked a lot about how federal funds are going to be a prominent source of funding for non-urban and urban grants. And projects with federal funds need to demonstrate compliance with the National Environmental Protection Act before they receive a grant agreement. We do have an opportunity to apply some exceptions or exemptions to this process. But in order to do that, we need to have good information to see what permits are needed. We need good information to help us see if you will or will not need an environmental assessment. Good information can help us get you your grant agreement faster. And it is always, always, always better for us to have this information upfront than discover something after award. When that happens, it can lead to lengthy delays in getting your project started. So we're really focusing on that this year. And then part of this also includes an environmental impacts table. And it's extremely unlikely that any project will have no positive or negative impacts in this table. And blank tables are a big red flag for us, especially when we have impacts to consider, like effect on recreational resources. We're a local parks grant program. You're going to have an effect on recreational resources, and we hope it's a positive one. You can explain that in our application. The type of information we ask for is in the application. It's things like soils, history of contamination. We have some floodplain development questions, threatened species questions, and within the application, you'll find links to technical assistance that can help you out with all of this. We have assistance for conservation measures you can add to your project, resources for environmental information you can provide us, and that it just really helps us get through our process. The second category here under stewardship is sustainable design. You can have 0 to 10 points here as well. And the scoring criteria itself says that the applicant has successfully demonstrated the integration of sustainable design features and practices. In the application, we're going to ask you how you plan for sustainability in the park. So do you have a city or regional sustainability plan? Did you look at this site as a standalone sustainability effort? We're going to ask you what elements in the scope reduce energy use, water use, emissions, and if any best management practices have been implemented. We're going to ask you how the inclusion of any sustainability items affected the budget. We understand that sometimes sustainable design choices cost a little bit more. So here's your opportunity to get some points for that. And then finally, we're going to ask you how you will maintain these elements over a 25-year period or a 40-year period for aquatic facilities. So we ask a lot of questions here, and that's because oftentimes sustainable materials and sustainable design elements are the first thing amended out of an active grant if funds are tight. So we try to use this section to incentivize measures that are integral to your park site or design. We asked a question about budget because, yeah, energy reducing, water reducing choice can be more expensive from the get-go. So we want to make sure that this is factored into your project design from the outset so that we're not spending time negotiating it later. And the last section of our scoring criteria is teamwork. So we have 10 points total for this, and it's divided into 5 points for coordination with subject matter experts and partnerships. So in terms of coordination with subject matter experts, we can award up to 5 points, and the scoring criteria itself says the applicant demonstrates meaningful input to the proposed project by subject matter experts in natural and cultural resource protection, acquisition, planning, design, and construction. The proposed project reflects consideration and inclusion of best practices in all phases of project development. So what are we asking for here? We are asking you to seek inputs from experts on your project. Then we're going to ask you how you implemented their advice. We've added a few questions this year to help us get through the LWCF process that we've talked about in detail. So one of these questions is, have any environmental reviews, permitting process, or NEPA compliance actions taken place? If not, identify which relevant compliance actions may be required for your project and describe a plan of action. We do have technical assistance available for you to get you started. That's going to be under the resources page that we've talked about under the local park section. Scroll down, look for NEPA technical assistance. NEPA is the National Environmental Protection Act. The type of assistance and the extent of assistance that's appropriate and the action by subject matter experts is going to vary project by project. I'm going to give you a helpful hint here when you're approaching this section of the application. Use the LP Local Parks timeline document in the resources page and see what potential compliance issues your park will need to demonstrate. You can get started on things like your Texas Historical Commission clearance. If your project build something in navigable waters, you can engage the Army Corps right now. If you think you may need an environmental assessment, you can wrap that into your planning process and include those public comments as part of your application. And, you know, basically, the more prep we have done now, the sooner we can get you a grant agreement when awarded. And the better acquainted you are with these regulations, the smoother the process will go down the line, the sooner your park can be under construction. If you have questions about this, I'm going to point you first to that resources section. We spent a lot of time putting together these resources to help yourselves on this, but of course, we are always available to do consultations on your specific project. And last, teamwork, outside partnerships, 0 to 5 points. Our scoring criteria says, points shall be awarded on a percentage basis determined by dividing the total outside contribution value by the total match and multiplying the result by 3. So 0 to 3 points. And then the other portion is, the project demonstrates outside support above and beyond the required match. This can include overmatch and or documented community mobilization, 0 to 2 points. And so what we're looking for here is essentially, do you have partnerships, funding partnerships in place beyond just your community resources? You know, we ask that because we see that when there's more buy-in from the community, from outside partners, the projects tend to be more successful. However, if you're cobbling something together just to get the points, sometimes those aren't as successful. So 0 to 3 points is appropriate there. We will be asking you detailed information about the applicant's matching share of funds. We're going to be asking you to include signed letters of commitment for those with your application, especially if it's going to be part of your required match, not overmatch. We need to know that the match is available at the time of application. We cannot spend time wrapping that up later on in the process. And we're going to ask you just, you know, your basic budget questions. What's being contributed, the value of the contribution, how this value is determined. And that's all in the budget form. And then we'll ask you for backup in the project narrative form with an upload area where you can talk about that a little bit more. And for outside support, those are going to be like your support letters. That's going to be if you have funds devoted to the project beyond the required 50% match. So that means if you are applying for, say, a $500,000 grant, but you have a $750,000 match, you could get a couple points there. It's only 2 points, so it's not enough to you know, we don't want you messing with your project budget to get those 2 points. Because you can also get those points by having community mobilization, letters of support from the community, legislative support letters, just showing that you're in it, there's some skin in the game, and there's some expectations for this project beyond just us here at Texas Parks and Wildlife. All right, we are done with the scoring criteria. We just have a few more slides to go through, including this evaluation range. And so we score every application in a program against the other applications in that program. So that means that applications in the small community pool are scored against other applications in the small community pool. The same application may receive a different score on this evaluation range from year to year. It depends on what we see. Given some realities about our funding sources and timelines, you know, we look for projects that fit within our regulatory bounds, and we look for projects that are serving their communities the best. So these things can change from year to year. So if it's a resubmit and you say, hey, I thought we did good in this category last year, and how come this year we missed a point? Well, maybe someone blew us out of the water this year with a fancy new splash pad sustainability element or something. You know, we just have to keep it flexible and respond to what's in a given application pool on a given year. So there's going to be some required documents for your application beyond just the narrative sections in the application. And some of them are required for all projects. So we have the resolution authorizing the application. A signature is required on that. And there's a person named in the resolution who must be responsible for the project, and that must be a member of the local unit of government or an elected official. That's also the person that we recommend applying for the account in Argo 2020 as the administrator. The certification and programs assurances also require a signature. And both of those need to be signed and included with the application for us to score them. We don't have the capacity to accept drafts or chase them down after the application deadline. We just don't. So get those in, get them signed. If you can do that, we can pretty much score your application. The resolution section has 4 items within it. You can add more to it. I know that some city councils like to, embellish a little bit, add a few more conditions. As long as our requirements are there, you're good. And the resolution must be signed and dated by the government official, and it must be less than 1 year old. The starred items here, so the resolution and the certification program assurances, those again are the ones that must be in hand with your application when you submit it. The other ones, you're going to have to upload something into the location and vicinity maps and the site plan area and the site photos area and the aerial photo area in order to submit your application. So those are going to be required for all of our projects. But since we do fund projects with wildly different scopes and wildly different places, and with, some include acquisition, some are renovation, some are combinations, we can have lots of different required documents for those specific project types. So here are some of those. The first is verification of outside match and or overmatch. So we will not count your outside match or your overmatch in your outside support section of the application unless it is verified. If your project is in the floodplain, you have to answer the questions and provide the uploads about floodplains. If your project is on existing parkland, you have to provide proof of legal control at the time of application. If your project involves acquisition, you must have your land value determined at the time of application. We recommend using a broker's opinion letter or another third-party way to verify that. If it's just the tax appraisal district, your budget is likely going to be changing all around between application and project management tasks. So please try to get the most accurate figure for that possible. If you have an acquisition project, you're also going to have to turn in a boundary map at the time of application. We do have a method for allowing acquisition of lands ahead of the grant deadline and or when we can offer a grant agreement, and that's called a waiver of retroactivity. We need to have that in hand before you purchase, take control of, take donation of, dedicate the land as parkland. So if you have questions about that, we have some technical assistance on it. It's not, this isn't appropriate for every acquisition project, but for some of them it's critical. And then we did have some questions about publicly owned non-parkland earlier. If you're going to try to go that route, we have a special assurances form that you must sign. Your authorized official has to sign it. So someone like your city manager, your mayor, needs to verify that it meets those standards. And then if you're going for a project that is a lease or a project that will be serving another governmental entity at certain times, we will need a joint use agreement or a lease at the time of application. I know someone's going to ask me if a draft is okay. We will still score your application if this is a draft. However, we have seen these relationships fall apart after the grant is awarded. So it's going to be much more competitive if you can nail down those details, get it signed, and include that in the application. I strongly recommend you make sure that that is taken care of ahead of time. So that was a lot of information. There's a lot of requirements. It's a lot of work. But one of the things that I think we can all feel really good about is that all of our local park grant projects help us achieve the Texas Parks and Wildlife mission, which is to manage and conserve the natural and cultural resources of Texas and to provide hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation opportunities for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. Each park that we fund is protected in perpetuity. So that means that the time that you spend now putting this together and through the project management phase is going to be serving people who haven't even been born yet. So there are a lot of boxes to check and a lot of information to provide, but it really is for this mission that is really great and that we all get to participate in together. So here is all of our contact information. If you don't know us, you'll probably know us before you submit your application. I certainly recommend getting in contact with us. We can offer consultations with enough notice. As we get closer to the deadline, obviously our capacity diminishes to take care of all of that. So act soon, act early with consultations and with submitting your application. And we hope to get a really, really good batch this year and continue putting parks on the ground across Texas. Now, I see some questions blinking here. I don't know if we want to go over any or if we want to take a minute to get any additional questions that we can address now. I'm going to just give y'all a minute to put any additional questions in the box. Okay, let's see. So we have lots of questions about property being used as match, and I think we answered those all. We've got lots of questions about getting copies of this presentation. That will happen later on. I see one here from Liz. Would renovation garner as many points as development? We don't distinguish between those two in our scoring criteria. It's up to you to prove that that's what your community needs, and it's up to you to fit that within our grant scoring criteria. Floodplain properties. We got questions about floodplains. All the application, like when you're getting your resolution done or signed, just take care of it then. If you're developing in the floodplain, we will require proof of floodplain insurance before we can get you your grant agreement. Most local government entities are self-insured, so a statement to that effect is something that's great to include with the application. You do not need a meeting with us for floodplain development. So many parks develop in floodplains because parks are a great way to make floodplains an amenity for the community. So this is something we do all the time. Is stocking a pond with fish eligible? The fish themselves are not an eligible cost. They will not last 25 years. But we certainly can do fishing ponds. Any water projects, though, this just brings up a good point. Any water projects, it's really great to do a consultation with us first because usually there's some extra permitting involved, and we want to help you and get involved as easily as possible. Okay, well, does anyone else have anything to say? Okay. Well, thank you guys for sticking with us. This was a long one. There's lots of information. Check out that resources page. We worked hard on generating those for you, and Blake has been such a champ in putting them up and helping us out with all of those. So I think we want to say thank you to Blake for helping us get the applications up and running, get all of our assistants up and running. And again, if you have any questions, shoot us an email. All right, have a great afternoon, everyone.